From send them back to please come back. The perception of Eastern Europeans in the United Kingdom has drastically changed in an astonishingly short time. At the time of the 2016 referendum, the public cited the mass influx of migrants taking their jobs and overburdening public aid as major causes for supporting the Leave group. While there was support for Eastern Europeans in the country, it ultimately fell short when the referendum results were read out. The people of the United Kingdom wanted the free movement to end. With it, they also wanted an end to Eastern Europeans stealing from the United Kingdom. Why then have many business owners in the United Kingdom asked for migrants from Eastern Europe to come back? They want them back to fill labour shortages, but what about the people of the UK? The people who believed the Eastern Europeans were taking rather than giving. Not just the United Kingdom, Western Europe has long undermined the importance of Eastern Europeans and how they've shaped the continent's economy. How easy was it for the United Kingdom to join the EU? How easy was it for France and Germany? Now ask yourself how easy it was for Bulgaria. The matter is that there has been a massive disconnect between Eastern and Western Europe for the longest time. However, one would assume that the only platform where these differences could be settled would be within the European Union, an alliance that's intended to serve all of Europe. While that might have been and still is the essence of the EU, many have repeatedly pointed out the unnecessary challenges that came for Eastern European countries when joining the alliance. And we'll take Bulgaria as an example here. The country began its formal process of integration into the EU in 1995 when it submitted its application for membership. After years of negotiations, Bulgaria was eventually allowed to join the EU on January 1, 2007, alongside Romania. However, the road to membership was fraught with difficulties, and the challenges continued even after accession. To preface, the EU has a set of fundamental principles that are seen as requirements for countries when joining the alliance. Two of them would be rule of law and the fight against corruption. Notwithstanding the fact that Bulgaria fell short of these stipulations, many believe that the EU used these terms as delaying tactics. Is Western Europe free from all forms of corruption with immaculate judicial systems? Still, change was necessary and Bulgaria was required to implement extensive reforms to align its legal and institutional framework with EU standards. The country also had to demonstrate a commitment to eradicating corruption, which involved establishing new anti-corruption agencies, reforming the police and judiciary, and ensuring transparency in government dealings. But as Bulgaria strived to meet EU standards, the alliance announced that economic reforms were also necessary. The stipulation was that Bulgaria needed to transition from a centralized socialist economy to a market-oriented one. The EU closely monitored Bulgaria's progress in achieving macroeconomic stability and improving its business environment. Bulgaria was determined to join the alliance and followed through on every stipulation the EU presented. In 2007, the country was allowed to join the EU, but post-accession challenges continued in 2007, stating that the country hadn't effectively eradicated corruption. The EU placed Bulgaria under the cooperation and verification mechanism to monitor its progress in judicial reform, anti-corruption measures, and tackling organized crime. The CVM reports have frequently highlighted Bulgaria's slow progress and ongoing issues, leading to criticisms and even threats of sanctions from the EU. It wasn't all smooth sailing, as with many Eastern European countries that joined the EU. Bulgaria saw a significant number of its citizens move to the UK in search of better job opportunities. This migration was met with concerns in the UK. In response, transitional controls on Bulgarian and Romanian workers were placed. These restrictions were only lifted in 2014, but by then the migration issue had already influenced the political discourse in the UK, contributing to the growing Euroscepticism that eventually led to Brexit. Bulgaria wasn't alone. In fact, it was part of a handful of countries that faced challenges when joining the EU, namely alongside Poland and Romania. The undeniable fact here is that the major connection between these three countries was that they were all in Eastern Europe. Broadly, did the EU have a problem with Eastern Europeans? Ever since their accession into the EU, Eastern European nations have contributed toward the growth and betterment of EU economies, particularly as they're seen in Western Europe. At the time of each accession, be it Bulgaria, Poland or Romania, many Eastern Europeans migrated to Western Europe seeking job opportunities. Nevertheless, since the enlargement rounds of 2004 and 2007, which brought countries like Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia and the Baltic states into the EU, Eastern Europeans have played a vital role in the continent's economic landscape. Workers filled labour shortages in various sectors, particularly in agriculture, construction, healthcare, hospitality and manufacturing. They often took up jobs that were less desirable to local workers, providing essential labour that supported the functioning of these industries. In agriculture, for instance, Eastern European workers became the backbone of the seasonal workforce in countries like the UK and Germany. Many of these migrants were highly skilled and educated, bringing with them valuable expertise in fields such as information technology and engineering. Some Eastern Europeans took advantage of the opportunities within the EU to start their own businesses, contributing to the entrepreneurial dynamism in their host countries. These businesses often catered to niche markets, enriching the cultural and economic diversity of the countries in which they operated. Britain's withdrawal from the European Union was not due to a solitary reason. It was a culmination of different factors and causes that led to the people of the UK announcing their decision to leave the alliance in the 2016 referendum, albeit by a small majority. 51% of the population supported the idea of a better Britain outside of the alliance. Again, there's no point in determining the only reason for the outcome. But among many reasons, one was Eastern European migration. In 2017, an article titled "On the Causes of Brexit: How Migration from Eastern Europe Contributed to the Rise of UK Euroscepticism" discussed how the free movement of migrants was a potential driving force for Brexit. The article suggested that the increase in migration from Eastern Europe brought significant changes to local communities across the UK. Many British citizens perceived this influx as a threat to their jobs, wages, and access to public services, although economic studies often showed that migration had a generally positive or neutral effect on the UK economy. These benefits were not uniformly distributed. For instance, areas with lower levels of education and higher unemployment saw the arrival of migrants as direct competition for scarce resources and jobs, which heightened anxiety and discontent. The negative rhetoric was supported by the media and led to the perception that migrants were putting undue pressure on public services such as housing, healthcare, and education. All right, let's talk about Brexit, that glorious leap into the unknown that promised tighter borders and a brighter future for the British workforce. Remember the Leave campaign slogan? Take back control. They plastered it everywhere like a dodgy paint job, making sure no one could miss it. Control over immigration was a big part of the deal. Less immigration, they said, meant more jobs for British workers. It was a simple equation. Fewer foreigners equals more work for us. The idea was that by reducing the number of people coming into the country, there would be more opportunities for those already here. Sounds great, right? Well, like most things in life, it turned out to be a bit more complicated than that. The reality of the situation was far from the straightforward promises made during the campaign. See, the UK had become pretty reliant on migrant workers, especially from Eastern Europe. These workers were integral to many sectors of the economy. They were the ones picking our strawberries, building our houses, and doing the jobs that many Brits were either unwilling or unable to do, and even, dare I say it, treating our sick. The healthcare sector, in particular, relied heavily on migrant workers to keep things running smoothly. But the Leave campaign told us not to worry. We'd be better off without them, they said. We'd finally have a chance to train British workers and unleash the potential of our own people. The vision was to create a self-sufficient workforce that could fill all the gaps left by departing migrants. It was a bold vision, I'll give them that. But as we're about to find out, reality had other plans. The transition was not as smooth as promised. and the gaps left by migrant workers proved difficult to fill. The promised jobs and prosperity didn't materialize as expected, leading to a host of new challenges for the UK. Let's be honest, folks, when it came to certain jobs, British workers weren't exactly lining up. Who could blame them? Picking fruit in the blazing sun or working on a construction site in the pouring rain isn't everyone's cup of tea. These jobs are tough, demanding, and often thankless. But guess what? Someone had to do it. The economy needed these roles filled to keep running smoothly, and that's where our friends from Eastern Europe came in. They filled the gaps in the labour market, doing the jobs that many Brits simply didn't want. They brought with them a strong work ethic and a willingness to take on these challenging roles. They weren't just farmhands, though. Eastern Europeans were everywhere, contributing in various sectors. They were the friendly faces in our local shops, always ready to help with a smile. The skilled builders laying bricks, constructing the homes and buildings we live and work in. And the dedicated nurses caring for our elderly, providing essential healthcare services with compassion and professionalism. They became a vital part of our communities and our economy, integrating into the social fabric and contributing to the local culture. But the Leave campaign's rhetoric painted a different picture. They focused on fear and division. They focused on the perceived negatives of immigration, ignoring the very real and very positive contributions that these workers made. The debate often overlooked the fact that these individuals were not just workers, but also neighbours, friends, and integral members of our society. Well, surprise, surprise, it seems like the UK got more than it bargained for. After Brexit, something funny happened, or maybe not so funny, depending on who you ask. Those Eastern European workers that the UK had come to rely on, yeah, they started leaving en masse. Turns out being told they weren't wanted and facing a mountain of new bureaucracy wasn't exactly a recipe for a happy stay. The red tape was just too much. Who knew? Well, a lot of people actually, but it seems the message didn't get through. The numbers don't lie, folks. They tell a story of their own. The UK saw a massive drop in EU migrants after Brexit. The statistics are clear and undeniable. In the agricultural sector alone, the impact was staggering. Fields that were once bustling with activity now lay empty. Farmers were left scratching their heads, wondering who was going to pick their crops. The labour shortage hit them hard. The construction industry felt the pinch too. Projects slowed down and deadlines were missed. Suddenly, finding skilled builders was like finding a decent kebab after midnight. Near impossible. Tools lay unused and sites were eerily quiet. And let's not forget the healthcare sector, already stretched thin. Hospitals were bustling, but not with enough staff. The loss of experienced nurses and doctors from the EU only made a bad situation worse. Patients felt the impact and the healthcare system struggled to cope. So the chickens had come home to roost. The UK had a labour shortage, and it was a big one. What was the government's solution, you ask? Well, they tried a few things, but most of them were about as effective as a chocolate teapot. They introduced a new visa scheme for seasonal agricultural workers, but it was riddled with problems. The quotas were too low, the bureaucracy was a nightmare, and it simply didn't attract enough workers. They also tried to encourage British workers to fill the gaps, but that didn't go so well either. Turns out asking folks to swap their office jobs for back-breaking labour for low wages wasn't exactly a winning strategy. Remember that time the government tried to appeal to our patriotic side? No? Well, maybe that's because it was a colossal flop. They launched a campaign called Pick for Britain, urging Brits to roll up their sleeves and harvest the nation's crops. It sounded good on paper. Well, what could be more patriotic than picking strawberries for your country? The problem was most Brits didn't share the government's enthusiasm for manual labour. The campaign was met with a collective shrug from the British public. People pointed out that the low wages and poor working conditions in the agricultural sector were a bigger deterrent than any lack of patriotism. Pick for Britain quickly became a punchline, a perfect example of the government's out-of-touch approach to the labour crisis. Just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, BAM! The COVID-19 pandemic hit. And guess what? It made the labour shortages even worse. Borders closed, travel restrictions tightened, And suddenly, even those few migrant workers who were willing to come to the UK couldn't. The pandemic exposed the fragility of the UK's post-Brexit labour market. Supermarket shelves started emptying, fruit was left rotting in the fields, and businesses struggled to cope. The government, caught off guard, again scrambled to find solutions. They relaxed visa rules and offered incentives to lure back some of the workers they had so eagerly shown the door to. But the damage was done. The pandemic had ripped the band-aid off a festering wound, revealing the true cost of Brexit's broken promises. Section 7. Brexit's broken promises a nation of unskilled workers. Remember all those promises about more jobs for British workers? Well, it turned out that finding Brits to fill those jobs was harder than finding a sober person at a university pub crawl. It wasn't just about wages either, although those were a factor. The truth was, the UK had become reliant on migrant workers for a reason. They had the skills and the work ethic that many employers simply couldn't find at home. Brexit had created a skills gap, and it was widening by the day. The government's talk of training British workers was well-intentioned, but it was a long-term solution to an immediate crisis. In the meantime, businesses were struggling and the economy was feeling the strain. Section 8. The future of British labour. Importing lettuce and doctors. So where does that leave us? Well, the UK is now facing a future where it may have to choose between importing its lettuce or its doctors. The irony, of course, is that this is exactly what the Leave campaign promised to prevent. Instead of taking back control, Brexit has left the UK more reliant on foreign labour than ever before. The government is now caught between a rock and a hard place. They can either stick to their guns and watch as labour shortages cripple the economy, or they can swallow their pride and admit that their grand Brexit experiment has backfired spectacularly. Section 9. The real cost of Brexit beyond the price of fish. The impact of Brexit goes far beyond empty shelves and unpicked fruit. It's about broken promises, economic uncertainty, and a nation divided. The Take Back Control slogan now rings hollow, a bitter reminder of a future that never materialized. The true cost of Brexit can be measured in lost opportunities, strained relationships with our European neighbours, and a growing sense of disillusionment among many Brits. It's a cost that will continue to be paid for generations to come. Section 10. A final thought, from Take Back Control to Out of Control. As we navigate the choppy waters of a post-Brexit world, one thing is clear. The simplistic solutions promised by the Leave campaign have proven to be anything but. The UK is now facing a complex reality where immigration and labour shortages are inextricably linked. Whether we like it or not, we need migrant workers. They are our colleagues, our neighbours, and our friends. And frankly, we'd be lost without them. The question now is, can the UK learn from its mistakes and chart a new course? A course that acknowledges the vital contributions of migrant workers and creates a fair and sustainable immigration system? Only time will tell, but one thing is for sure, the stakes have never been higher.